Hey friends, happy Sunday and welcome back to another week of What's for Dinner. This week's What's for Dinner is a collab with my friend Megan over at Megan's Kitchen. You may have heard of her before. I have collabed with her in the past. She does all kinds of food related content on her channel. What's for Dinners, just like other recipe videos, grocery hauls, that kind of thing. So if you haven't already checked her out before, hit the link in the description box. Go check her out. Tell her that you came over from my channel. I know that if you love my videos or food related videos, you'll love her channel as well. And if you're new here and you came over from Megan's channel, hello, welcome. I'm Taylor. I'm a stay-at-home wife and mom, and I share these What's for Dinner videos every Sunday to hopefully motivate you to cook more for your family and to give you some new meal ideas. So if you like those kinds of videos, I hope that you will subscribe down below. As always, any recipes that I mention will be linked in the description box. Now let's go ahead and get into this week's What's for Dinner. Friday night we had a barbecue pulled pork flatbread pizzas. This is something that I always love to make when we have leftover barbecue pulled pork. And this pork actually came from my stepdad. He had texted me the weekend before and was like, hey, I have a lot of barbecue pulled pork left. Would you like some? And I was like, of course. I would never turn that down. But I didn't know what to do with it right then, so I just threw it in the freezer and then decided to pull it out this night and make some pizza with it. So I pulled the pork out of the freezer, let it thaw, and then just put it in a pot with some barbecue sauce and let it warm up. And then I also had these flatbreads in the freezer. I always buy these when I see them on markdown and just keep them in the freezer for when I want a quick and easy dinner. So I pulled those out, and then I like to warm those up first in the oven before I put any toppings on them. So I typically put them in the oven on a sheet pan and just stick them in there while the oven preheats and like leave them in there for like 5 minutes, and then I pull them out and I'll put the toppings on. So we did some barbecue sauce, of course the pulled pork, and then some cheddar cheese, and that's it. But you could add anything that you like to these. We use these flatbreads for all different kinds of pizzas, but they're really good for the pulled pork pizza. And then I put them back in the oven and we do them on 450 for about another 8 to 10 minutes until they get as crispy as we want them to be. And then to go on the side of this, we usually do like some fresh veggies or a salad. Saturday night I made beef stew. I actually made this recipe for the first time a couple months back and it was really good, so I made the same one again. But usually I never make the same beef stew recipe twice because there's so many out there and I'm always into trying something new. But this one was really good, so I am making it again. It is from The Cozy Cook and will be linked down below. So to start off here, I've got some stew meat in a bowl. I should have cut these into smaller pieces. I regret not doing that. So take my advice, do cut it into like 1-inch cubes like the recipe states. And then to that I added a 1/4 cup of flour, some pepper, some garlic, some celery salt, and just some regular salt. The recipe called for garlic salt, but I didn't have garlic salt, so I just did garlic powder and then a little bit of extra salt. And then I mixed that around and made sure my meat was coated really well with the flour. And then in my cast iron pan, I heated up 3 tablespoons of olive oil, and then I got my meat in there, and you're just going to let it brown on each side. If your pan isn't big enough, you might have to do this in batches. I was using my really large one, so I only had to do 1 batch, and it doesn't take very long, just like 45 seconds to a minute per side. And then I'm going to take that out and transfer it to my crock pot. Then in the same pan, I melted a tablespoon of butter, and then I added in some onion. I did like half of an onion, I think that was all I had left. And I think the recipe calls for like 2 cups of yellow onion, but do however much onion you like, it'll still taste delicious. I cooked that up for about 5 minutes until it got nice and tender, and then I added in some minced garlic. It said 4 cloves. I definitely did more than 4 cloves of minced garlic, and let that cook for about another minute, and then I transferred that to the crock pot as well. This recipe calls for a wine, but I have never added that when I've made this. So instead it has a substitute for that. You can do 1 cup of beef broth and add in 2 tablespoons of red wine vinegar. So I had that mixed up, and then I also did an additional 4 cups of beef broth, and then 2 teaspoons of some beef bouillon, 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce, 3 tablespoons of tomato paste, about 5 medium-sized carrots that I cut up, and then some baby gold potatoes that I cut in half, 2 bay leaves, some rosemary. It says a sprig of rosemary. I just do some dried rosemary, and then I make sure everything is submerged in the liquid. Put a lid on this and cover it and let it cook on low for about 8 hours. After the 8 hours, you can just go in and remove the bay leaves. And then if you also used a rosemary stem, take that out as well. And then if you want to thicken the sauce, you can. I like to thicken it. So I mix together 1/4 of a cup of cold water and 3 tablespoons of cornstarch on the side, and then pour that in. And then I also add in about half a can of peas that I have drained. We did this the first time with frozen peas, but my family does not like frozen peas. So I did canned peas this time, and we liked it much better. And then I just put a lid on this and let it sit for about 10 minutes to warm the peas and kind of thicken the sauce. And to go with this, I just did some crusty Italian bread that I get at Aldi. It's like one of those take and bake breads. Did that on the side, and this was delicious. Sunday night was another recipe that we love. This is Magic Crispy Baked Shrimp. We loved this so much the first time that we had it as shrimp. I then took it and did it with tilapia, and it's just as good with tilapia. But I've been wanting to have shrimp lately, so I chose this recipe. So to start off, I put 2 tablespoons of butter in a 9x13 baking dish, and then it calls for wine. But this is another recipe I don't do the wine in. It says you can sub the dry white wine with half a cup of chicken broth. So I do that. And then I stick that pan in the oven while it preheats. Takes about like 10 minutes. You're going to preheat your oven to 425 and just let that butter melt into the chicken broth. So while that's doing its thing in the oven, I'm going to prepare the shrimp. So I've got 2 tablespoons of melted butter here in this bowl. And then to that, I'm going to add the juice of 1 lemon, a couple cloves of garlic. It usually calls for like 3 cloves of minced garlic, but I think I did like 5 or 6 because we really like garlic. And then some salt and pepper. I mixed that together, and then I added my shrimp to this and made sure it was coated with all of the butter and lemon juice, and then just set that to the side until that pan comes out of the oven. And then in another bowl, I'm mixing together our crispy topping. So in this bowl, I have another 2 tablespoons of butter melted. If you don't like butter, then this recipe is probably not for you because it's very buttery and delicious. To that, I am adding 3/4 of a cup of panko breadcrumbs, 1/4 a cup of Parmesan cheese, a little bit of salt, and a little bit of parsley. And then I just mix that together really well. Then when that pan comes out of the oven, the butter is all nice and melted and bubbly, and we're just going to take our shrimp and dump it in the pan and arrange it in one flat layer. You don't want anything stacked on top of each other. You want one nice flat layer. And then we're going to take our breadcrumb mixture and sprinkle that over the top. And then this goes back in the oven on 425 for about 12 minutes. And then if yours isn't as browned on top as you would like it to be, you can broil it on high for about 2 minutes. Sometimes I do this, and then sometimes I don't need to. I don't know why, but in the past I made this and I needed to broil it for like 2 minutes to get it nice and browned. But this time that I made it, I did not need to broil it. I don't know if the last time I made it was before I got my new oven, so maybe that's it. I cannot remember for sure. Maybe it was before I got my new oven, and maybe that's why. But with my new oven, I did not have to broil it. It came out nice and browned and crispy on top. Usually when I make this, I make some sort of garlic parmesan pasta like orzo or couscous or something. This night I wasn't feeling it. I wasn't feeling like doing the smashed potatoes that I had on the meal plan. I just made a box of Kraft macaroni and cheese, and then we had fresh veggies or a salad on the side. Monday night's dinner isn't very much of a recipe. I had these little smokies in the freezer. They were given to me, and I can usually also find them on markdown. And I never know what to really do with them besides making like pigs in a blanket. But you don't always want to make the same thing when you have things. So I decided, I was like, I'm going to make some Beenie Weenies with them. So I took them, I cut them in half, and then I fried them in the pan for a few minutes just to get them a little browned. And then I'm going to be adding them to the crock pot. I am adding them to the crock pot with this giant can of pork and beans. It was cheaper to buy this giant can than to buy like 4 of the smaller cans. So I just added them to the giant can and then put them in the crock pot, and I cooked them on low for like 4 hours. That was it. You could add some stuff to it if you want. You could use baked beans if you want. But this was fine. It was simple. It was cheap. And it was actually really tasty. Yeah, I used to eat like canned Beanie Weenies all the time when I was a kid. But this was great. We all liked it. I would make this again with the little smokies or even hot dogs. But yeah, we just had a roll on the side. I made some like Sister Schubert's rolls. And then we had some fresh veggies as well. Tuesday night we had Enchilada Bake. This is a recipe that existed before I ever started doing What's for Dinners. Andy and I just kind of came up with this one day when we were both in the kitchen before I was doing YouTube videos, I'm pretty sure. Originally we made it with flour tortillas, but now I don't really like flour tortillas very much. Like in things, I feel like they get a weird texture when they have like enchilada stuff on them and everything. So I stick to corn now. I'm starting off by browning up 1 pound of ground beef with some taco seasoning. It's probably equal to about half a packet of taco seasoning. You're going to end up using the whole packet, but I like to brown it up with half of it. And then if I need to drain any grease, I'll drain that and then add the other half in later. And then since I'm using corn tortillas, I'm also heating those up in batches on the stove. I could fit like 4 at a time on this square like griddle pan. So I was heating them up on one side, flipping them over, heating them up on the other side. This didn't take long at all. It was like 30 to 45 seconds per side. And then just set those warm tortillas to the side until we were ready to assemble the casserole. Once the ground beef was cooked all the way through, I drained any grease that I needed to drain, and then I added in the rest of the taco seasoning along with 1 can of Rotel, and then I turned the heat to like medium high and let that simmer until like all the liquid from the can of Rotel had pretty much like cooked out. Alright, now I am greasing my casserole dish. I'm using a 9x13, and then I'm going to put down a layer of corn tortillas. In the past, I've done like 4 of the corn tortillas in the bottom. This time, I used like, 5.5 to cover the bottom. Just arrange them however you want. You want a layer of corn tortillas to mostly cover the bottom of the pan. And then you want to do a layer of that meat and Rotel. And then top that with some cheese. I'm doing some shredded Mexican style cheese. And then I am using a 28-ounce can of enchilada sauce. And I'm using about 1/3 of it here. And then topping it with some more tortillas, more meat, more cheese. Another 1/3 of the enchilada sauce. And then 1 final layer of tortillas. The final portion of the enchilada sauce, and then some cheese on top. And then this goes in the oven for about 25 to 30 minutes on 350. When it comes out, I like to let it sit for like 5 to 10 minutes, just like you would a lasagna. It holds together better if you let it sit for a few minutes. And then we like to top this with lettuce, salsa, some sour cream, some pico, whatever you would usually like put on your enchiladas or your tacos, you can put on this. And I didn't have anything on the side of this night. This was all I made. But you could do beans, rice, your typical like Mexican food sides could go well with this. Wednesday night we had Olive Garden chicken gnocchi soup. So this recipe called for some already cooked chicken. You could use like a rotisserie chicken, which is what they recommended, but I decided to just thaw out my own chicken breast, cook it up in the air fryer, and then dice it up. And I had plenty of chicken here for this recipe, and like another recipe if I wanted to. I actually ended up using it for like a lunch, but I could have froze like half of this chicken and used it in another recipe that called for cooked chicken like later down the road. So for my chicken in the air fryer, I am just seasoning it up all over with some onion powder, garlic powder, salt, pepper, paprika, and then I spritzed both sides with a little bit of olive oil cooking spray, and then they went in the air fryer for about 25 minutes on 375, flipping them halfway through. And I did check the internal temperature to make sure that that they were fully cooked, and after the 25 minutes they were perfectly cooked. So then I just set them to the side until I needed them in the recipe. I had to pull out my very large Dutch oven pot for this recipe because I knew I was going to be making a lot of soup. So in that, I am heating up 4 tablespoons of butter and 1 tablespoon of olive oil. And then once that butter was melted, I added in some diced onion, some diced celery, and some minced garlic. I did definitely more than the recipe called for. It called for 2 cloves of minced garlic. I think I did 5 or 6 again. I always use like 5 or 6 cloves because we just really like the taste of garlic. But I cooked that for like 5 to 10 minutes, stirring it often until the onion became translucent. And then I whisked in 1/4 of a cup of all-purpose flour, and I let that cook for 30 seconds to a minute. And then I'm going to whisk in my half and half. So I did 1 quart of half and half. And then we're going to let that simmer over medium heat until it starts to thicken. And I did stir this often, making sure to like scrape the bottom of the pot and make sure nothing was sticking to the bottom. And then once that half and half starts to thicken, I'm going to whisk in the chicken broth. So I actually did water and then enough of the Knorr chicken bouillon to equal chicken broth. And then I just simmered that again until it started to thicken. And then once it had started to thicken again, I stirred in half a teaspoon of salt, some thyme, parsley, and nutmeg, and then also my shredded carrots, spinach, chicken, and my gnocchi. I only use about a breast and a half. The recipe called for 1 cup of chicken breast, but I added the cup in and I was like, that doesn't look like enough chicken. So then I added in about another half a cup and I was like, okay, that looks like enough chicken. So I would recommend adding a little bit more chicken because it looked kind of light on the chicken and I knew my family would want a little bit more. And then I just let that simmer for a little bit longer. I think I did like another 5 minutes until the spinach started to wilt and everything was heated through. You'll know that the gnocchi are done. They start to kind of like float to the top a little bit. And then you can taste this for seasoning, see if you need to add any salt or anything. Because I used that Knorr chicken bouillon as my chicken broth, I didn't need to add any additional salt. And then I just served this soup with some frozen breadsticks on the side. These look really good. Like they look like they're the breadsticks from Olive Garden pretty much. But these were just like from the freezer section at Ingles. And they paired really well with the soup. The soup was delicious. I will definitely make this recipe again. I wouldn't say that it tasted exactly like the one at Olive Garden. I think the one at Olive Garden is just a little bit thicker, a little bit more creamier. Like maybe if you used heavy cream instead of half and half, like maybe that's what it needs. I don't know, but it was still delicious even with it not being perfect. Thursday night we tried a new crock pot recipe. This is called slow cooker chicken piccata. And to start off, I am mixing together half a cup of flour, some salt, and pepper. We're going to use this to kind of like coat our chicken. And then I'm going to take 2 chicken breasts and I'm going to trim off any excess fat. And then I'm going to cut them in half horizontally. So I have 4 like really thin pieces of chicken breast. And then I'm going to take those 4 pieces of chicken breast and coat them with that flour mixture on both sides and then set them to the side while my oil heats up. So I'm going to pan fry these for just a few minutes per side just to get them browned. It gives it a little bit more flavor. It gives it a little bit of a better texture. And so I'm just melting 2 tablespoons of butter in a pan, and then I'm going to cook these chicken breasts on medium-high heat until they're browned on each side. It's just about like 2 minutes per side. And then I'm going to transfer them to the crock pot. So once I get all of my chicken in my crock pot, I'm going to add in half a cup of lemon juice, half a cup of chicken broth, some cloves of minced garlic. I definitely did more than the recipe called for. I can't remember how much I did, but just know I always use more garlic. And for my chicken broth, I actually use water and the Knorr chicken bouillon. That's like a regular thing around here. If I say chicken broth, I mean water and Knorr chicken bouillon. And then I added in half a cup of butter, which is 1 stick of butter. And then the recipe calls for 1 tablespoon of Dijon mustard, and somehow I did not realize I was out of Dijon mustard. So I looked it up online. It said you could just use yellow mustard. It's just going to have a slightly different flavor. Honestly, I couldn't tell you that this had mustard in it at all. It did not taste like yellow mustard, but it did taste delicious. And if your family likes capers, you would also add capers to this as well. But I am the only one in my family who likes capers. So I got all that in there, and then I covered this and cooked it on low for 5 hours. The recipe said high for 3, but I was going to be gone a little bit longer than that, so I did low for 5, and it came out perfect. When I got home, all I had to do was pull out the chicken. It stayed together pretty well. It was cooked like perfectly to where it was done, but it still like held its shape, which is what you want with this recipe. And I just took that out, and then to that I added 2 tablespoons of cornstarch and 2 tablespoons of water that I had mixed together to kind of thicken the sauce. I whisked that together really well, and then added my chicken back to it, and then I just let that sit while I cooked up some pasta. I did this 1-pound bag of fusilli from Trader Joe's, just cooked that up, and then we served the chicken with the lemon sauce over the pasta, and it was delicious. Everybody loved it. I will definitely make this again. It says you could serve it with pasta or rice or even mashed potatoes, but I think we'll stick with pasta because we loved it on top of the pasta. And that is going to be it for this week's What's for Dinner. If you made it here to the end, thank you so much. It really means a lot to me when you watch my videos to the end. It helps my channel. It helps me grow. It helps me pay for things because y'all watching my videos and all the ads just really helps out my family. So thank you so much. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this was a collab with my friend Megan, so please make sure you go check out her video, show her some love, and let her know that I sent you over there. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you plan on trying down below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!